Hey guys, I'm going to show you the layout of the Korg Minilogue XD and all of the parameters and what they do and all the menu options and how to select them. And this is for people who are legally blind. So I'm going to explain absolutely everything using, numerical descriptions so you can operate this synth while blind or very hard of seeing. We'll begin with the back panel. We'll start on the right side. On the very right side, you'll have your jack for the power supply. That's where the 9-volt DC power supply plugs in. To the left of that, you will feel a rectangular button. That is the power button. I'm going to push that now. And you will see, if you can, if you're not totally blind, there is a screen on the right side of the Minilogue. And it goes into a tuning mode as soon as you turn the power on. This takes approximately 15 or 20 seconds to complete before you can make any sound. To the left of the power button, you have a USB jack. This is so you can do your firmware updates or export your patches, use the librarian, and connect it to your computer, all those sorts of things. To the left of that, you will feel a screw. You can ignore that. And then you will feel the output for a 5-pin MIDI cable. To the left of that, you'll feel the input of a 5-pin MIDI cable. Moving further to the left, you will begin to feel the 1/8" jacks. You will have the clock sync output. To the left of that, the clock sync input. To the left of that, a CV input number 2. To the left of that, CV input number 1. To the left of that, you will feel another screw. To the left of that, you will have your first 1/4" input, which is a sustain pedal that you can have on traditional keyboards. To the left of that, you have the right output of your stereo signal. To the left of that, you'll have the left output of your stereo signal, which is also the mono output. So if you're going to just use one of those, you should use the left output. And then to the left of that, you have your headphones output, which is also 1/4". So you'll probably need to use a 1/4" adapter if you're plugging in headphones directly. Now we'll move on to the control interface. We have 3 main rows of controls and then a 4th row of auxiliary controls, or the joystick and the sequencer buttons. So we'll call the first row row A, the second row row B, and the third row row C, going from the top to the bottom. And A1, control A1, is the master volume knob. All the way to the left is quiet, all the way to the right is as loud as it can be. Control A2, just to the right of that, you have the portamento knob. All the way to the left there's no portamento. You turn it to the right and you'll have more and more portamento. Control number 3 is the waveform selector for oscillator 1. In the top position, it is in sawtooth wave. The middle position is a triangle, and the bottom position is a square wave. To the right of that, you have your octave selector for oscillator 1. Now this switch stays in the middle. You can push it up or down, and it will return to the middle every time you press it. There are 4 LED lights to the right of this switch, which indicate one of the 4 octaves you can choose. If you press the switch up, it will go to the higher octaves. As you press the switch down, it will go to the lower octaves. Control number 5, just to the right of that, is the pitch knob for oscillator 1. As it is set by default right in the center at 12 o'clock noon, the pitch is set to whatever your master tune settings are. To the left, it lowers the pitch up to 1200 cents or 12 semitones. And to the right, you can raise it up to 1200 cents or 12 semitones, one whole octave. And it is very precise. To the right of that, you have the shaper for oscillator 1. As the shape knob is all the way to the left, you will have the pure form of whatever one of the 3 waveforms you selected for oscillator 1. Either your sawtooth, your triangle, or your square. As you turn it to the right, it'll change the shape of those waves. If you have it set to the square wave, this acts as a pulse width option. the square wave gets thinner and thinner as you turn it to the right. The next control is a switch, just to the right of the shape knob. This is your sync switch. In the down position it is off, in the up position it is on. This is your oscillator sync switch that makes sure the phase of oscillators 1 and 2 always restart at the same time, so you don't get any phase interference. Again, that's a personal preference for how you want your tone to sound. To the right of the sync switch is the ring modulation switch. In the up position it is on, in the down position it is off. That multiplies the frequencies of the oscillators, giving you 2 new frequencies to deal with. Again, that's just a tonal characteristic, personal preference whether or not you want to use it. The next control to the right in row A is your mixer knob for oscillator 1. This controls how loud oscillator 1 is. All the way to the right is as loud as it will be, all the way to the left it will be off. The next control to the right, which is the 10th control, A10, is your filter cutoff. This controls the filter cutoff of the low pass filter. All the way to the right is completely open, all the way to the left is completely closed. Following that, you have the first control of the amp envelope. It is the attack. All the way to the left, this knob will have a very short attack, and the more you turn it to the right, the longer the attack will be. The next control to the right is the decay of the amp envelope. That controls how long the note sustains its peak when you press the key. To the right of that is the sustain of the amp envelope. This controls how loud the note will be as you hold down the key. All the way to the right, the note will play at its peak volume as long as you hold down the key. The more you turn it to the left, the quieter it will be as you hold down the key. To the right of the sustain knob, you have the release knob. This is a function that activates after you let go of a key, after you've played it, and this will determine how long the note rings out after you have let go of the key. The next control to the right, which is the 15th control, is a switch, and this is your effect selector. You have 3 options here. In the top position, you have modulation effects. The middle position, you have reverb effects. And in the bottom position, you have delay effects. So you choose which effect you want, and then you go to the next switch to the right, which is whether the effect is on or off. In the bottom position, the effect is off. In the middle position, the effect is on. And there is an up position, but the switch does not stay in the up position. It reverts back to the middle position. Every time you push the switch up, it will change the effect you can choose. So for instance, we have it set to mod effects, and so you're selecting whether you want a chorus, an ensemble chorus, a phaser, a flanger, and so on. Now, those are your modulation effects options. You can also come down past the screen to the first row of 4 little rectangular buttons just below the screen. You can see that they're edit mode, write mode, exit mode, and shift mode from left to right. These are your editing options. The 4th button is a shift button. This gives you secondary options to some controls. As you hold down the shift button and you press one of the controls that accepts a shift option, can bring up contextually sensitive options. So for instance, if we go back up to the effects here, and we have this first switch up to modulation effects and the second switch is on, we can hold the shift button and go to the second switch and push it up towards select. And it will go into subcategories of choruses or ensemble choruses or phasers, whatever you have selected. So here, for instance, we'll have the phaser selected in the major menu. Hold down the shift button and now press select, and we have a few different phaser options. The first one by default is stereo. If you press select a second time, it will be fast. A third time is called orange, A fourth time is called small. A fifth time is called small resonance. 6 is called black. 7 is a formant phaser. 8 is called twinkle. And then 9, you're back to the default stereo. The reverb options, if we press the switch down and let go of shift, and we just hit the select button, again the switch right next to it, go up, you have submarine, horror, hall, smooth, arena, plate, room, early reflection, space, riser, submarine, and then back to horror. The default one is submarine. When you just select the reverb for the first time, it will be default submarine. Then if we put the effects selector in its down position and have delays, and then press the select button on the next switch to the right, you'll have high pass, tape, one tap, stereo BPM, which now the delays will be synced to the clock, mono BPM, ping pong BPM, high pass BPM, tape BPM. Then we're out of the BPM options and we're in a doubling delay, and then stereo delay, which was the mono delay, and ping pong delay. So ping pong delay is the default one. When you just select a delay for the first time and click it on, it will be in ping pong. I don't believe I told you what the mod effects were. So if we go back to the modulation effects and hit the select button, we have flanger, chorus, ensemble. Chorus is the default. As soon as you select mod, chorus will be your default option. The second option is the ensemble chorus. Third option is phaser, then flanger, and then you're back to chorus. Now to the right of the second switch, the on-off select switch, you have a time switch, which is a parameter that affects all of the effects, either the modulation time, how long the phase of the modulation lasts. When it's in reverb, sorry, is there an airplane going by right now? When it's in reverb mode, the time is how long the reverb will last, up to 10 seconds. When it's in delay mode, the time is either in milliseconds if it's not in BPM, or it will be in beat divisions if it is in BPM. So when it's not in BPM, the fastest is 30 milliseconds, the slowest is 645 milliseconds. If we select one of the BPM options, all the way to the left is 1/64th notes, then 1/48th notes, then 32nd notes, then 24th notes, 16th notes, 12th, which is basically a dotted eighth note, a dotted 16th note, an eighth note, a sixth note, a 3/16th note, which is your dotted eighth note, which is a very common one. That's about at the noon position is your 3/16ths. Then you have quarter notes, then third notes, then 3/8, 1/2, 3/4, and whole notes, all the way to the right. To the right of that, you have your 18th control, your final control. In the top right corner of row A is the depth. And that is basically your wet-dry mix of your effects. And that's essentially the same thing for all three effects. Now if we go all the way back to the left to row B, or the second row, just below the first row, the first control, B1, all the way on the left side, is the tempo knob. All the way to the left, it will be at 56 beats per minute. That is the slowest tempo you can have. 120 beats per minute, which is very common, is just about at your noon position. And then all the way to your right, you have 240 beats per minute, which is your fastest BPM setting possible. To the right of that, you have your voice mode depth knob. I'll explain that more when we get to row C. But that is a parameter that will affect the voice mode, whether you're in polyphonic, unison, chord, or arpeggiator mode. I'll explain that more. We'll get back to that knob when I'm finished with this row. Then Control 3 in row B is your waveform selector of oscillator 2. It is the same thing as oscillator 1. The top position is saw, the middle position is triangle, the bottom position is your square. To the right of that, again, you have your octave selector, which likes to revert back to the middle position, whether you push it up toward the higher octaves or down toward the lower octaves. It likes to revert back to the center, and you can choose one of 4 octaves to play in. The next control to the right is the pitch of oscillator 2, just like oscillator 1. The noon position is in tune. Turn it to the left, you turn it down in cents, down to minus 1200 cents, or minus entire octave, and is accurate to within about 2 cents. Turn it to the right, and you can go up 1 octave. The next control to the right is the shape mode, just like the first oscillator. You can control the shape of either your sawtooth, triangle, or square wave, depending on which one you have selected. To the right of that, you have something different. This is below the sync and ring mod switches. This is a knob. It is the cross modulation depth. Now, cross mod is sort of a modulation effect where oscillators 1 and 2 interact with each other. And this is, again, personal preference for changing your tone. To the right of that, you're back in the mixer. You have the mixer knob for oscillator 2. All the way to the left, it is off. You turn it to the right up to maximum volume. To the right of that is your resonance for the filter. So above the resonance, you have your cutoff, and below that, you will have the resonance of the filter. To the right of that, you now enter the envelope generator, which is similar to the amp envelope, but this envelope generator can be set to the cutoff, the pitch of oscillator 2, or the pitch of oscillator 1. I'll get to that in a second. So the first knob is your attack, just like in the amp envelope. It works the same way. The second knob is your decay, same way. It has the same effect as the decay in the amp envelope. And the third knob to the right of the decay is the intensity of the envelope generator, how much it is applied to your program that you're making. To the right of that, you have a switch, 3 positions. The default is the cutoff. The envelope generator will by default be set to your cutoff. In the middle position, it will now affect the pitch of oscillator 2, and in the top position, the envelope will now affect the pitch of oscillator 1. Or no, it will affect the pitch of both oscillators at the same time. So the top position affects the pitch of everything. The middle position affects only the pitch of oscillator 2. The bottom or default position affects the filter cutoff. To the right of that, you have your screen. To the right of the screen, you have your program value knob. This, by default, selects the patch that you are playing. As you turn it to the right, it will go up toward the 500 number, because you have 500 slots. If you turn it to the left, it will go backwards. If you're at slot 1 and you click it to the left once, you'll be at slot 500. The good thing about the program value knob is that it clicks as you turn it, so you can tell exactly where you are in the menus, and this will come in handy when I describe to you the menu options. These clicks will be very important for those who have trouble seeing. In order to navigate the menu, you will absolutely need to count clicks. So those are the controls for row B. We come down to row C, all the way back to the left, and you have the octave selector for the entire keyboard. This is similar to the octave selector of the individual oscillators. This octave selector will move both oscillators down simultaneously, and it also likes to revert to its middle position. You can push it to the left twice, and that will bring you to the lowest octave. Or you can push it to the right twice from its default, or 5 times from the left. So there are 5 LEDs that light up. To the right is the highest octave you can play, all the way to the left is the lowest octave you can play. So again, there are 5 LEDs. By default, it's in the middle. So by default, the middle light is illuminated. It is playing in the middle octave, and there are 2 octaves lower or 2 octaves higher that you can choose. To the right of that is another switch. This is an up-down switch, and again, this one likes to revert to its middle position. There are 4 LEDs to the right of this switch. The topmost LED is the polyphonic voice option. This allows you to play 4 notes at the same time, and that's with the switch pressed all the way up. Now we can go back up to row B, parameter number 2, the voice mode depth option. So while your voice mode is in polyphonic mode and you turn the voice mode depth option all the way to the left, by default it is just in your standard polyphonic mode. As you turn it to the right, once you get to about 10 o'clock on the knob, it enters duophonic mode. This is playing 2 notes at the same time with 2 voices each. The more you turn it to the right, the more those 2 voices each will detune away from each other. So all the way to the left is poly mode, 10 o'clock enters duo mode. The more you turn it, the more detuned those duophonic voices become. Now if we go back to C2, the voice mode switch, click it down once, you're in unison mode, and that is a type of monophonic mode where all 4 voices are playing on one key, one note. When you go back up to B2, the voice depth mode, or voice mode depth, the more you turn it to the right, the more detuned those 4 voices get. The more you turn it to the left, if you turn it all the way to the left, they will be all perfectly in tune. Now go back to C2, the voice mode selector, press it down one more time. You are now in chord mode. The voice mode depth all the way to the left in chord mode is your standard monophonic mode. That's a little secret option. So you still have your monophonic mode as long as the voice mode depth is all the way to the left. When you turn it to the right, it will begin the chord shapes that you can play with just pressing one key, up to 4 voices. So the first one is playing in fifths. The second option is playing, so the first one playing in fifths, that's about, I would say 9 o'clock, a little, like it's like at 8:45, the dial. This dial doesn't click, so this can be very difficult to navigate. So around 8:45 is the fifths option. Then 9 o'clock would be sus2 chords. 9:30 is minor chords. 10 o'clock is major chords. 10:30 is sus4 chords. 11 o'clock is minor 7 chords. 11:30 is 7 chords. Noon is 7 sus4 chords. 12:30 is major 7 chords. 1 o'clock is augmented chords. About 2 o'clock is diminished chords. About 2:30 is minor 7 flat 5 chords. 3 o'clock is minor major 7 chords. 3:30 is major 7 flat 5 chords. And that's it. That's the last chord. It doesn't go any more than that. And then, if we go back to C2, the voice mode selector, press down one last time, you're in arpeggiator mode. And if we go back up to the voice mode depth knob, that's B2. All the way to the left is manual 1 mode, which is the order you press the notes down, it will play the arpeggiator, repeat that pattern in whatever order you press the keys down. Around, the next option is manual 2, which is around 9 o'clock, a little earlier than 9 o'clock. That's the same thing. It plays the notes in the order that you press them, but it will raise up 2 octaves, or 1 extra octave. So you'll play essentially 8 different notes now. Then a little after 9 o'clock is rise 1, which will play from the lowest note to the highest note. Then around 10 o'clock is rise 2, which will play from the lowest note to the highest note, and then 1 octave higher in the same pattern. Then around 11 o'clock is fall 1, which will play from the highest note to the lowest note. Then around like 11:30, almost 12 o'clock is fall 2. It will play from the highest note to the lowest note, and then drop an octave lower. 12 o'clock is rise fall 1, so it'll go up and down from the lowest to the highest, and from the highest to the lowest. Then rise fall 2 is around 12:30, almost 1 o'clock. That will go up 2 octaves and then drop 2 octaves. Or sorry, we'll go up from where you're starting and then play an extra octave and then drop back down to where you started. Then you have poly 1 at around 1 o'clock. That is a sort of rhythmic chord progression that will play more than one note at the same time. Then around 1:30, 2 o'clock, you have poly 2. It's just another rhythmic mode that plays polyphonically. Then around 2 o'clock, 2:30, you have random 1. Then around 3 o'clock, you have random 2, so it'll go up an extra octave. Then around 3:30, almost 4 o'clock, you have random 3, which will go up yet another octave. And that is the final one. It doesn't go, there are no more options after that. If you go back to C2, the voice mode depth, you are still technically in arpeggiator mode. If you press it down one more time, now the arpeggiator mode light is blinking, which is a latch mode. So that means you can press down a chord and then lift your hand up, and it will be as though you're still pressing it down. And to turn that off, you can just press the voice selector switch up one time, and it'll be in ARP mode still, but it will no longer be in latch mode. Now we can go over to C3. This is a selector switch with 3 positions. Default is the down position, which is the selector for the multi-engine, or the digital oscillator. It is the 3rd oscillator on the Minilogue XD. In the default down position, you have noise waveforms. To the right of that switch, you have a little screen, a rectangular screen, that tells you the name of the waveform you have selected. To the right of that screen, you have a knob that clicks. The first option is it says high. It's a basic white noise generator. You can then click it to the right, and it'll say low, which is another, I guess it's kind of like pink noise. Then you have a peak noise generator, which it's like a really loud white noise. And then you have a decimator noise option, which is like a lo-fi kind of electronic chip gone haywire sound. And those are your options for the noise generator, while the switch control number C3, the switch, is in the bottom position. The middle position is a bunch of digital waveforms that come loaded up on the Korg. If you go past the screen again to the right, you have your type selector. Again, it starts in sine wave 1, which is your basic sine wave. Then click it once to the right, you have sine wave 2, sine wave 3, sine wave 4. Keep going to the right, you have saw wave 1, saw wave 2, square 1, square 2, fat 1, fat 2, air 1, air 2, decay 1, decay 2, creep, throat. And that is all of your choices for that. And then if you go back to Control C3, just to the left of the screen, and push it into its top position, these are where you can store your user waveforms, your custom waveforms that you can get from third-party programmers, or if you know how to program, you can make your own. By default, it does give you one to work with that you can, that is just by default, it's up there. So you have, I think, 15 extra slots to upload your own. And there's more you can do with this user selector in the menu options, but I will get to that later. Now to the right of the screen, again, you have your type selector knob. In user waveforms, it doesn't do anything if you don't have anything else uploaded. It stays on the waves option, which is the Korg's default uploaded one. To the right of the type knob, which is the second knob past the screen, or control number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, C5. This is your shape knob. It is very similar to the shape knobs for the analog oscillators 1 and 2. It will change the shape of the digital waveform. And these are basically like it's like an FM or wave folding shaper. To the right of that, you're back in the mixer, and this knob is your volume control for the multi-engine, or your third oscillator, your digital oscillator. All the way to the left, it is turned off. All the way to the right, it is as loud as it can be. To the right of that, you're back in the filter options. Now you have the drive switch. This is a switch, 3-position switch, and it is basically a gain control for your filter. In the down position, there is no drive going into the filter circuit. In the middle position, it is a 50% increase in drive, and in the upper top position, the drive circuit is 100% input to the drive. By default, it is off, which is equivalent to the down position. To the right of that, you have the key tracker option for your filter. This is another 3-position switch. In the down position, it has no key track whatsoever. In the middle position, it has 50% key track for the filter, and in the top upward position, it tracks the keyboard 100%. What this means is that the low notes will have more filter applied, and the top notes, the higher notes, as you ascend the keyboard, will have less and less filter, so they will be more and more vibrant, they will have more and more frequencies. It's as though you're opening the filter as you go up in pitch, and closing the filter as you go down in pitch. To the right of that, you have your LFO options now. You have another 3-position switch to the right of that. This is the shape of your LFO waveform. The top position is the sawtooth, or a ramp down wave. The middle position is the default position when you load up a new patch, is a triangle wave. And the down position is a square wave, or an on-off type of LFO. To the right of that, you have another 3-position switch. In the top position, it is BPM synced, meaning the LFO will be, the rate of the LFO will be in time with the clock. And to the right of this switch is your rate knob. I'll get to that in a second. If we go back to this switch, so the top is BPM, the middle position, or the default position, is normal mode, which is a free-running LFO mode. And then in the bottom position, the LFO is now in one-shot mode, meaning every time you press a key, the LFO will trigger one time and then stop until you lift your fingers off of the keys and press them down again. So to the right of this 3-position switch, you have your rate knob. If it is in one-shot mode or normal mode, it will be calibrated to milliseconds. The slowest being 0, it will not move at all, and all the way to the right, it goes up to 1023 milliseconds. If you have the switch set to BPM, all the way to the left, it is a 4 whole notes time amount of time. Then you move it to about the 8:30 position, and you have 2 whole note time. Then about a little after 9 o'clock is 1 whole note. Then you have 3 quarter notes worth of time, and in about the 9:30, 10 o'clock position. Then about 10:30 position, you have half notes. Then about the 11 position, you have 3/8 notes length of time. Then about 11:30ish, almost 12 o'clock, you have 1/3 notes, whatever that is. Then at noon, you have quarter note length of time. Then a little after noon, you have 3/16 or a dotted eighth note worth of time. Then around 1 o'clock, you have 1/6 worth of a whole note. Then around 1:30 you have eighth notes. Around 2 o'clock you have 1/12th time division. Then 2:30ish you have 16th note. Around 2:30, almost 3 o'clock is 1/24th. Around 3 o'clock is 1/32. Around 3:30 is 1/64th, and that is the highest, that is the fastest it can go in BPM mode. To the right of the rate knob in the LFO, you have the intensity knob for the LFO. All the way to the left, the intensity is 0. Now this is a unipolar knob, meaning it only has positive values. All the way to the left is 0. The LFO will not do anything. That is the default position. You can turn it all the way to the right. Around noon is about 250 intensity, and it goes up to 511. These values are arbitrary. It's basically noon is of 50%, and all the way to the right is 100% intensity. Now, unipolar means that it only has positive values. Some synths will be bipolar, meaning you could like go into negative values, and that will change the shape. It will basically reverse the shape of the LFO. So the sawtooth shape of this LFO is a ramp down, meaning when the LFO cycles, it starts at the highest intensity and then ramps down as time goes forward. On other synths, if the intensity value was negative, allowed you to go into the bipolar negative range, you could basically make it a ramp up wave. This synth cannot have a ramp up wave because the intensity knob is unipolar. So all the way to the left it's off, and it only goes to positive values. To the right of the intensity knob, we have another 3-position switch. This is the destination for your LFO. By default, it is in the down position, which is the cutoff, so the LFO will affect the cutoff of your filter. In the middle position, it will affect the shape of oscillators 1, 2, and 3. And if you go into the top position, it will affect the pitch of oscillators 1, 2, and 3, all simultaneously. Now to the right of that switch, you have those edit buttons that I mentioned before, that have, from the left to the right, you have edit mode button, the right button, the exit button, and fourth and final is the shift button. I will get into these functions in a moment after I explain when I get to the sequencer buttons. So we'll come back to these. Now we go all the way back over to the left side of the synth. And below the octave selector, all the way to the left, you have the joystick. By default, when you move the joystick to the left, it is a pitch bend that lowers the note you are playing. When you move the joystick to the right, it is a pitch bend that raises the pitch of the note you're playing. When you move the joystick up, it increases or opens the filter cutoff. When you move the joystick down toward yourself, it closes the filter cutoff. Then if you continue to the right, you'll feel nothing for quite a bit, and then you'll feel 16 small rectangular buttons. This is your sequencer. You can click these buttons to program your sequencer. They also work as menu navigating buttons, and I will now explain that. If you go back to the right side in row C, where you have your 4 edit buttons, below that you also have 4 sequencer buttons. You will feel 2 rows of 4 of this similar feeling buttons. So above them, above the sequencer buttons are the edit buttons. That's just below the screen on the right side. Below these 4 edit buttons, you have your sequencer buttons. Now if we go up to the edit buttons, and we go to the first of the edit buttons, it is edit mode. When you press that, your sequencer buttons will now be blinking. Some of them will now be blinking. And on the screen you will see from top to bottom you have these 3 options on the screen. You have program edit, which will open up a whole array of options for the particular program that you're editing, the sound you're working on. Just below that, if you go to the right of the screen and go to the program value knob, click it to the right once, you will go to sequencer edit options. This is where you can now program your sequencer. And if you click the program value knob again, one more time to the right, you will be in global edit options, which will allow you to edit some of the main underlying options for the synth, like master tune and MIDI channels and things like that. I'll get to those. So click it twice to the left. We're back in program options, program edit. Now here, if you then go back to your 16 sequencer buttons, you'll see some of them blinking. The fourth sequencer button is your first blinking button. The first three sequencer buttons will not do anything, but if you press the fourth sequencer button, the first blinking one, you press that down, now you have your joystick options. When you press it once, it will, the first option here is the bend range for when you turn the joystick toward the right. How many notes do you want it to bend? So if you go to the right side of the screen, back to the program value button, or knob rather, you can select how many notes, up to 12 notes, you want it to go. So it's by default set to 2. So if you turn the program value to the left, one time it will be a 1 note bend range. To the left a second time, it will not bend at all, it will be off. So by default again, it is set to 2 note bend range, and it can go up to 12 notes. So you have to count. So in the default, at 2 notes, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. From the default position, you're at 12 note bend range. Now if you press that same fourth sequencer button again, the first blinking one, you push it again, it will give you the bend range of the lower side of the joystick. When you push it to the left, how many notes you want it to bend. Same thing. Push that same fourth button again, and now you have the LFO intensity. This is when you push the joystick upward, how it increases the intensity of the LFO. Now if you go back to the program value button on the right side of the screen and turn it to the right, by default it's on LFO intensity. If you turn it to the right, it will be the modulation time of your mod effect, if you have a mod effect set. Turn it to the right again, mod depth again. That's affecting the modulation depth of an effect that you chose, if you've chosen an effect on this patch. This is, when you're pushing the joystick upward. Turn to the right again, you have the reverb time. To the right again, you have reverb depth. To the right again, you have delay effect time. To the right again, delay depth. And that is your last option. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 turns to the right from the default option, which is LFO intensity. Now from the default option, which is LFO intensity, you can still turn it to the left. You have LFO rate, to the left again, envelope generator intensity. So that is, in row B, you had your envelope generator that could either be on the cutoff, the pitch of the second oscillator, or the pitch of both oscillators. Turn it to the left again, you have the envelope generator decay. Turn it to the left again, the envelope attack. Turn it to the left again, you have now the amp envelope release option. Turn it to the left again, amp envelope sustain. Turn it to the left again, amp envelope decay. Turn it to the left again, amp envelope attack. Again to the left, you have the resonance for your filter. Again to the left, you have the cutoff for your filter. Turn it to the left again, you have the mixer level of the multi-digital oscillator. Turn it to the left again, you have the mixer level of the second oscillator. Turn it to the left again, you have the mixer level of the first oscillator. Turn it to the left again, you will have the shape option for the multi-digital oscillator. Turn it to the left again, you'll have the cross modulation option. Turn it to the left again, you have the VCO, or the oscillator 2 shape option. Turn it to the left again, oscillator 2 pitch, turn it to the left again, oscillator 1 shape, turn it to the left again, oscillator 1 pitch, turn it to the left again. You have the voice mode depth option now affected. Turn it to the left again, you have the portamento option. Turn it to the left again, you have the gate time if you are in arpeggiator mode. So that's how long the note will last before it moves on to the next note. And that is your final option for the Y. Now if you push that fourth sequencer button again, you have the range from 0% to 100% of how much moving the joystick upward will affect any of those parameters. By default it is set to 20%, and each click of the program value knob is 1%. So you can move it all the way to the left, which brings it into the negative values. So again, the default is positive 20%, and you can go all the way to negative 100% or positive 100%. And you can count each click. It will be 1% each click. So the default is 20 plus 20%. If you press that fourth sequencer button again, you can now assign what happens to the joystick going when you press it down towards yourself. All the same options that you have by pressing the program, turning the program value knob either right or left. By default, it is set to the cutoff. If you press the button, the fourth sequencer button again, then you have the range again of how much it affects the chosen option from negative 100% to positive 100%. In this case, the default is always negative 90% on the joystick as you pull it down to yourself. So the default for that is negative 90. The default for the upward motion again is positive 20. And those are all of the options for your first blinking button or your first sequencer button. If you go to the fifth sequencer button, now you have some CV input and output options here. If you go to your program value, the first option here, when you just click the fifth sequencer button once to enter this, the first option by default is CV in mode. Now this will choose how the CV in jack behaves, like what it does. Do you want your CV to affect the modulation, the CV gate plus, the CV gate minus, turn it to the right, and those are your three options as you turn it to the right. So by default it's modulation, turn to the right once, CV gate plus, turn it to the right a second time, CV gate minus. Push the fifth sequencer button again, and you can now assign what CV input 1 affects, and as you turn the program value knob, nothing happens. This is for modular synthesis. So this is a little over my head. I'm not into modular synthesis, so I don't actually know what this option does. Someone in the comments can maybe clarify, but it isn't all that important for using this synth on its own. Push the fifth sequencer button again, and you'll have the CV input 1 range, which again you cannot change with the program value as it is. Push the fifth sequencer button again, and you have the input options for CV2, CV input 2. Push it again, you get the range options for CV input 2. So again, this is if you want to attach some sort of CV control or some sort of modular synth to affect your Minilogue XD. Not very important for just playing the XD on its own. If you press the sixth sequencer button now, this is where you get into the micro tuning options. By default, it is set to your equal temperament scale. That is with the program value all the way to the left. As we turn the program value knob to the right once, you have a pure major intonation, again, pure minor, again, a Pythagorean intonation, again, a Werkmeister, again, Kernberger, again, Slendro, again, Pello, again, Ionian, again, Dorian, then Aeolian, then major pentatonic, then minor pentatonic, then a reverse scale, which is the same as equal temperament, except that the high notes are now on the left side of the keyboard, and it descends as you move to the right side. So it's sort of like a mirror image of your keyboard. Again, you have one of Aphex Twin's Custom Scales 1, Aphex Twin Custom Scale 2, Aphex Twin Custom Scale 3, Aphex Twin Custom Scale 4, then Aphex number 5, Aphex number 6. Then you have DC Custom Scale. I don't know what that is, but I think it was an artist that helped work on the XD. DC Scale 1, DC Scale 2, DC Scale 3, and then you get into your user scales. So you have user scale 1, user scale 2, user scale 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you have user octave 1. I'll explain what scales and octaves are in a moment. Now you have user octave 1, user octave 2, user octave 3, 4, 5, and 6. And user octave 6 is all the way to the right. There's nothing past that. Now if you click the 6th sequencer button again, you come to the scale key, which can either be, which by default is, it says 0 note. You can go to the right to plus 12 note. Each click is 1 note. Or you can go to the left to minus 12 notes. So again, you know, you have minus 1, minus 2, minus 3 as you go to the left, plus 1, plus 2, plus 3 as you go to the right, up to 12. That essentially is choosing where your scale begins. By default, 0 note is C. That's really not important to... It really just isn't that important of an option. You just keep it at default if you're trying to get in custom scales. Just begin with C. You can drop it down to, you know, if you want to get down to A, you know, -1 would be B, -2 would be B flat, and -3 would be A. So if you like to start your scales at A, then you can just set it to -3. But again, that's a really arbitrary and weird thing for programmers. As a musician, it doesn't matter what the scale key is because you just hold down the key and tune it to what you want. I'll show you how to do that in a second. You press the 6th sequencer button again, and you have program tuning, which this is positive or minus up to 50 cents. So each click is 1 cent. If you move the knob to the left, it detunes it to -cent values. You click the program value knob to the right, it tunes it to positive values, and each click is 1 cent. This will affect the master tuning of just this program. It's not global, it is just for this program, and it will offset the master tuning. So say your master tuning is set to just 0 default, then this will offset it by however much you want from your master tuning, and it will only affect this program. If you click the 6th sequencer button again, you have transposed notes. From -1 to 12, from 0, the default is 0, and go from -12 to +12. Each click is 1 note to the left or right. Negative values to the left, positive values to the right. And this basically just moves the keyboard over by 1 half step per note value. So if you put it up to +1, now instead of playing a C, you will be playing a C sharp, where the C key is. So it's just a way of customizing the keyboard to your liking if you want to do some like really non-traditional stuff. Those are the options for the 6th sequencer button under the program menu. If you click the 7th sequencer button, this is where you can choose where the LFO, some of the targets for the LFO. You have 3 options for your LFO. You can have it target all 3 oscillators, oscillators 1 and 2, just oscillator 2, or just the multi-oscillator. So again, the default is all. As you click the program value knob to the right, VCO 1 and 2 become the targets. To the right again, VCO 2 is the target. To the right, a final time, the multi-engine is now the target. If you click the 7th sequencer button one more time, you have LFO key sync. By default, it is set to on. This means that the LFO will trigger back from its beginning phase, it will restart the phase of the LFO every time you press a key down. If you click the program value to the left, it turns it off. So to the right, it's on, to the left, it's off. Now when the key sync is turned off, it means it will just be free-flowing or in normal mode, or it will be synced to the clock. It will be resetting its phase in sync with the clock if your LFO is set to BPM mode. Now if you hit the 7th sequencer button again, you have the LFO voice sync mode, which is essentially the same thing as key sync. It's similar. If you're in, say, polyphonic mode and voice sync is on, the LFO will restart for each note you press. If voice sync is clicked to the right, the program value knob is clicked to the left, it will turn it off. And now every time you press a new key in polyphonic mode, say you're holding down one key and the LFO is going, then you press down a second key, now you're holding down two notes, the LFO, it will now kind of be like you have two LFOs affecting each note independently. So basically, if voice sync is off, each note in polyphonic mode will have its own LFO, or the phase will begin when you press the note down, and they will be out of sync. So you can get some really crazy wobbly stuff going on when you turn voice sync off. And those are your options for the 7th sequencer button. If you press the 8th sequencer button, you have the envelope generator velocity. And you can turn it to the right. By default is 0. And you can turn it to the right, I believe, up to 127. Yeah. And that basically determines how loud the attack of the envelope generator is, or how intensely it hits down when you press a key. If you press the 8th sequencer button a second time, you got the amp velocity. Again, this by default it's on 0. It can only go into positive values toward the right, up to 127. This affects, you could press the key really softly, but it'll still be really loud. Like say you crank it up all the way to the right, then it'll be like you're smashing down on your keyboard. Now if you press the 9th sequencer button, you get some interesting options for the multi-engine, for the 3rd digital oscillator. When you just click it the one time to enter there, by default you're on the octave setting for the multi-engine. By default it is set to 8, which is the same octave as the default of oscillators 1 and 2. You can turn it to the left and bring it to 16, which brings it down 1 octave. Or if you turn it to the right, you can set it to either 4 or 2. So you have 16, 8, 4, and 2. So that is the same 4 octave choices you have for the octave selector of each of the analog oscillators. Now if you click the 9th sequencer button again, you have a routing option for the multi-engine, for the digital oscillator. Do you want, by default it is pre-filter, or you can click it to the right and make it post-filter, which means that the filter will no longer affect the digital oscillator. By default it is pre-filter, meaning that it will be affected by the filter. Now if you click the 9th sequencer button again, you have the legato option for the envelope generator. This essentially is for, it's most noticeable in monophonic or unison mode. By default, legato is set to on. That means the envelope generator will only reactivate if you lift up your hands from the keyboard and then press down another key. If you hold down a key, let's say you're playing in mono mode and you're playing a lead part, you're holding down a key and then you move to another key while still holding down the first one, the envelope generator will not re-trigger. It will keep doing what it has been doing. If you go to the program value knob and turn it to off, every time you press down a key, whether you're in mono mode or not, the envelope will re-trigger every time you press a key, even if you haven't lifted your fingers up off the keyboard. It will always re-trigger. I prefer to keep the legato off. That's my personal preference, so every time I go into a patch, I go to that option, and I turn it to the left one time. I just prefer re-triggering the envelope every time. That's just my taste. If you press the ninth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, press the ninth sequencer button another time, you have your portamento option. It's normally set to on. You can turn the program value knob to the left and it will be set to automatic, which is kind of like a smart portamento, depending on how you play the keyboard. It's kind of weird, a little wonky. Turn it to the and those are your two options. It's either on or auto. I keep it on because that way you can turn it off by going back to your portamento option, which again is A2, the second knob from the top left. You just turn that all the way to the left and it'll be off effectively. Now if you press the ninth sequencer button another time, you can sync the portamento to the clock. By default it's off. If you turn the program value knob to the right, it is on. Click the ninth sequencer button again, and you have your program level. This is kind of like a master volume. What it really is a gain control. It's at 0 decibels by default, and this is how you can increase the gain, even if the master volume is all the way to the right and is as loud as it can go. You can turn this knob to the right, and it goes in segments of 0.2 decibels. So each turn you do is 0.2 decibels, and it can get up to as loud as plus 6 decibels or as quiet as minus it goes pretty far down there, minus 18. So minus 18 decibels or plus 6 decibels in increments of 0.2. By default it is set to 0. So that's a gain control. Those are all of your options for the ninth sequencer button. If you now press the 10th sequencer button, this is context sensitive to control number C3, which is your 3-position switch for the multi-digital oscillator. By default, when it's in the down position, that is your noise generator, and you have no options on the 10th sequencer button. It doesn't do anything. If it's in the middle position, this gives you the preset options that Korg gave you, like all the digital signs and saws and squares and the throat and all the weird digital oscillators that come preloaded while the selector's in the middle position. And now you have some options to play with on the screen here, given the 10th sequencer button. So the first option is the feedback. This is kind of like has to do with frequency modulation. By default there's 0% feedback, and it goes in increments of 1%. You can turn it to the right up to 100% or turn it to the left into negative 100%. If you click the 10th sequencer button again, you have the noise depth, which is, well, you kind of have to hear it to know what it's doing. And again, it goes in increments of 1%, starts at 0 by default. To the right is positive, to the left is negative. Push the 10th sequencer button again, you have the shape mod intensity. So this is sort of like a hidden LFO for the multi-engine. And again, increments of 1%, positive or negative. Negative to the left, positive to the right. And this affects the shape knob of just the multi-digital engine. Press this 10th sequencer button again. You have the mod attack now, and this will determine how quickly or how slowly the modulation begins if you have the mod intensity turned up or down at all. Again, increments of 1% to the left are negative values, to the right are positive values. Press the 10th sequencer button again. You have the modulation decay. Again, you're affecting, this only works if you have mod intensity turned up or down, or anything that's, a non-zero value. And this affects how long it lasts. Press it again. You have the modulation key track, which is similar to the filter key track. And it starts at 0%, and increments of 1% to the right are positive, to the left are negative. If you have it in the positive values, the low notes will have less modulation, the high notes will have more modulation. If you turn it to the left and get into the negative values, then the high notes will have less modulation and the low notes will have more modulation. Okay, the 11th sequencer button is not illuminated for program options, therefore clicking it does nothing. If you go to the 12th sequencer option, this is where you can name your patch. Here it's called Sci-Fi Opener. This is the first patch of my synth that I made. It's just a cinematic kind of sound, but it will say initial patch usually, and you have 26 capital letters and 26 lowercase letters. If you twist it all the way to the right, or all the way to the left, if you just keep going left, 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 it will have no characters, and it stops at no characters. It can't go any further. So you have, from the 0 character, the first click to the right will give you a capital A, and then you can click it all the way to a capital Z, and then to the right of that is a lowercase a. Then it goes all the way to a lowercase z. And after that you have a 0, turn it to the right up to 9, and then you have an exclamation point when you turn it to the right past 9, then a question mark, then a pound sign, then a dollar sign, then a percent sign, then an ampersand, then an apostrophe, then a left parenthesis, then a right parenthesis, then an asterisk, then a plus sign, then a comma. Is that a period? It looks it's either a comma or a period. Then a hyphen. Oh, okay, that was a comma. Now you have a period. Then a backslash, then a colon, then a semicolon, then a left arrow, like a less than sign, then an equals sign, then a right arrow or a greater than sign, then an oh, that's the ampersand. When I said ampersand, I meant to say the and symbol. And all the way to the right is your ampersand, and you can keep turning to the right; it won't go anywhere else. So it stops at an ampersand. Then clicking again that 12th button, that will move it to your second character. Once you've selected what your first character for your patch naming wants to be, then you click it, move on to your second character, click it again, move on to your third character, and you have up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 characters for your patch name. When you get to the 12th slot, if you click it again, it goes back to the first character slot. Now if you click the 13th sequencer button, you can initialize the patch. The way you do that is you turn the program value knob to the right, and then it will say press right. So if you go back up to your 4 edit buttons, which are just below the screen, the second button is your right button. And if you click right now, it will reset the whole patch and bring you back to an initial patch. So that's that option. Then if you press the 14th sequencer, you can program dump. And you do it the same way. You turn the program value knob to the right and press the right button when you want to do a program dump. And those are all of your options for program options. The 15th and 16th sequencer buttons have no context there. So if we click exit, now we're back to normal. Go back to the edit buttons, hit edit mode again. Then you are in your sequencer edit. If you're in your edit mode and you turn the program value knob to the right one time, you now have sequencer edit selected. And now you only have 6 sequencer buttons illuminated. The first illuminated sequencer button is the 5th sequencer button. So you can press that, and that will choose your tempo. You can choose the tempo by using the program value knob, or by turning the tempo knob, which is parameter B1. And it goes in increments of 0.5 beats per minute. By default is 120. Now if you click the 6th sequencer button, you can choose your step length. Again, using your program value knob, all the way to the right is 16 steps. You turn it to the left down to 1 step, increments of 1 step. You press the 6th button again, the 6th sequencer button again. It will bring you to the step resolution option. All the way to the left, by default, it is 16th notes. You can turn it to 8th notes to the right, then quarter notes, then half notes, then whole notes. And this determines how long each step in your sequencer is. So by default it's 16th notes. You press the 6th sequencer button again, and now you can choose your swing. By default it is at 0%, and it can go into negative values down to negative 75% in increments of 1%, or positive 75% in increments of 1%. By default it is set to 0. Press the 6th sequencer button again, and you have the gate time for each step. By default it is 75%. You can have it up to 100% to the right, or 0% all the way to the left, and it's again in increments of 1%. Those are your options for the 6th button. If you click the 7th sequencer button, you have an all clear. This will clear your sequence. Again, when you have this selected, you can go to the program value knob, turn it to the right one time. It will say press right, and then you press the right button, and this will clear your sequence. If you press the 7th sequencer button again, this will clear the motion sequence. So motion sequences, you can change parameters per step. So the sequencer is quite powerful on this thing. It will save, like, you know, your filter. You can hold down a sequencer button and set the filter to a certain value, then hold down a different sequencer button and set the filter to a different value, and it will save all of those in your sequence. It's very cool. 10. So if you press the 10th sequencer button, this will show you the motion values that you have set for your sequence. If you push the 11, oh, yeah, is that right? Yeah, no, yeah, we're fine. The 11th button, again, will show you other motion options for your sequence, and the 12th sequencer button will show you the motion smooth options. I'm not entirely sure what these do. I don't use this sequencer, so I'm sorry about that. Now, if we hit exit again, hit the edit mode again. Yeah, exit is the 3rd button in your edit buttons. If you hit the edit mode again, the 1st button, and you click it down to global edit, which is either 2 clicks, or just 2 clicks down. Now you have your global options. If you press the 3rd sequencer button, you have the master tune. I have mine set to negative 32 cents. By default, it's 0 cents. And you can set it to the right, plus 50 cents, or to the left, minus 50 cents. Now 0 cents is, of course, A equals 440 hertz. That is standard since the 1930s. And it goes in increments of 1 cent. If you click the 3rd sequencer button again, you have your transpose note options again, just like we did in the program options. Now this is a global option, so this will affect all of your programs to transpose your keyboard by plus or minus however many notes you want, up to 12. If you press the 4th sequencer button, you can turn on and off the metronome using the program value knob. By default it's off. Turn it to the right, it'll turn on. Press the 4th sequencer button again, and this is the behavior of your sustain pedal. Now they call it a damper pedal because by default it is set to the negative value. If you press the pedal down, it will basically mute the notes. So it's like the opposite of a sustain pedal. But you can turn the program value note to the right, and it'll turn into a positive value, which it will now behave as a sustain pedal. If you hold down the sustain pedal, it will be like you're holding the keys on the keyboard. But by default it's in negative. Press the 4th sequencer button again. You have local switch. It's like basically local control. By default is on. You can turn it off if you're really into MIDI controllers and you're going to do everything from MIDI controller. You can turn the program value knob to the left, it'll turn it off. Press the 4th sequencer button again. You have the velocity curve type. By default it is type 4. You can turn it to the left down to type 1, or turn it to the right up to type 9. I mean, there are 8 types and then a constant. The 9th type is called constant 127. That's that means that the velocity, no matter how hard or lightly you press it, will be as though you're pressing it at 127 velocity. These are just different velocity curves. I don't know what they look like, but you can hear the difference just by playing around with them. If you hit the 4th sequencer button yet again, you have the knob mode. By default it is set to jump. If you turn the program value knob to the right one time, it'll be catch. If you turn it to the right again, you'll have scale. And those are your three options. By default, is on jump mode. And those are the fourth sequencer button options. If you press the fifth sequencer button, it will have an option for the clock sync input. It's by default 8th notes. If you turn the program value knob to the left, it will be 16th notes. So this is only important if you're using other Korgs and you're slaving the XD to something that has a clock sync. So other Korgs or a modular gear that has a clock sync. If you press the fifth sequencer button again, same thing with the clock out. It's set to default 8th notes. If you turn it to the left, it'll be 16th notes. If you press the fifth sequencer button again, you have the sync in polarity. By default, it's rise. If you click the program value knob to the right, it's fall. And then if you click the fifth sequencer button again, you have the sync out polarity. Again, by default, it's rise. If you turn it to the right, it's fall. Those are your options for the fifth button. If you press the sixth sequencer button, you now have your MIDI options. The first option here is the MIDI routing, and this accepts MIDI through USB, so it's USB plus MIDI is your first option. If you turn the program value knob to the right, it will be just USB. And those are your two options, either USB and MIDI or just USB. If you press the sixth sequencer button again, you can choose your MIDI channel. By default, I think it's on channel 1. I don't remember. I have mine set to channel 15. So honestly, I'm not sure what the default is. Just turn it all the way to the left to 1, just a whole bunch. And it's increments of 1 to 16. Increments of 1 up to 16. If you press the sixth sequencer button again, you have your clock source. By default, it's auto or auto MIDI. If you move the program value knob to the left, it's auto USB. If you move it to the right, it'll be internal. Actually, I think the default is internal all the way to the right. I can't remember, but I have mine set to auto MIDI. So it's, again, all the way to the left is auto USB, the middle option is auto MIDI, and all the way to the right is internal. If you click the sixth sequencer button again, this is where you have your MIDI receiving and transmitting options. So the first option here is receiving the transport. By default, it is on. So this is if you have, if you have a MIDI going in, you press the play on your MIDI controller, it will start playing the sequencer. If you press the sixth button again, you have your poly chain. This is new with the new firmware update. If you haven't updated your XD, or if you bought it some months ago, like before May, this won't be an option, but now it is. And this is if you get another Minilogue XD, you can polychain them together. By default, it is off. You can turn the program value knob to the right, and it will turn this unit into the master of the polychain. If you turn it to the right one more time, it will turn it into the slave. So if it is the master, it will have all of your options available, and the second unit will basically only be adding 4 more voices to the polyphony, and nothing you do on the second unit will really affect this one. If you turn this one to the slave, you will lose like all of your options and capabilities. So by default, it's off. And those are your options for the sixth sequencer button. If you press the seventh sequencer button, these are more MIDI send receive options. Here you have the MIDI receive program change. By default, it's on. You can turn the program value knob to the left and it'll turn it off. If you click the seventh sequencer button again, you have MIDI receive CC. So this means this will receive CC value changes from a MIDI controller or a sequencer. By default, it's on. Again, if you turn the knob to the left, it will be off. Press the seventh sequencer button again. You have MIDI receive pitch bend. By default, it's on. Turn the knob to the left, it's off. Click the seventh sequencer button again. You have MIDI transmit program change. By default, it's on. So this is if you are sending program changes from your Minilogue to another synth or to something that can receive program changes. Press the sequencer button again. You have MIDI transmit CC, which is by default on. Turn the program knob to the left, it'll turn it off. And then MIDI if you press the 7th sequencer button again, you have MIDI transmit pitch bend. By default, it's on. You can turn it to the left, it'll be off. Those are your 7th button options. Press the 8th sequencer button, and this will choose what is displayed on your screen. The first option is the parameter display. Now this will determine whether or not when you change a parameter, if you can see the value on the screen here. By default, it says all. You can turn, oh, sorry, that's not the default. The default is normal, which will only show a couple of parameters, like the rate of your LFO, and like the oscilloscope, and that's almost it when it's by default normal. If you turn the program value knob to the right, it will be set to all, which will show you a numerical value for every single thing you do. It'll show you a numerical value for the filter as you turn it, for the mixers as you turn it, for the shape knob as you turn it, for the pitch, how many cents of pitch is changing. So I definitely recommend going into this global option, which is on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the 8th sequencer button, and turning it 1 to the right. Turning the program value to the right one time, it'll be on. If you press the 8th sequencer button again, this will choose the brightness of the screen. So if you are hard of seeing, on default it is 5. You can turn it to the right up to 10 in increments of 1. You can turn it down to 1, which is very dim. So I would definitely recommend, if you're hard of seeing, if you're legally blind, to definitely turn this option all the way to the right. If you press the 8th sequencer button again, you have the auto power. I think by default it's on. I can't remember. Crap. But anyway, it's either to the left is off, to the right is on. I have it turned off. So this is like if the synth is sitting around for 30 minutes, it will just shut off. If you haven't touched it in 30 minutes, it'll automatically turn off. Now, if you press the 10th sequencer button, this is where you can make your user scales. The 11th sequencer button is where you can make your user octaves. So 10th is scales, 11th is octaves. Scales are that you can tune all 127 notes independently. So if you go all the way down to the lowest octave and you hold down the low C, see it says C1 on the screen, 0 cents. You can change the program value by in increments of 1 cent. To the right, you have positive up to 49 cents. To the left, you have negative values down to 50 cents. So in scale mode, you can tune all 127 notes in all 5 octaves independently. That's the 10th sequencer button. When you press the 11th, and this will automatically save. If you press the 10th sequencer button again, then this is user scale 2. Again, it's user scale 3. Again, 4, 5, and 6. And then when you're in user scale 6, if you press it again, you'll be back at user scale 1, and you can edit these independently. You don't have to save them. They automatically save. Any change you do to user scale is now saved automatically. You don't need to press save or anything like that. The 11th sequencer button is user octaves. Now, this is not tuning all 127 notes independently. This will tune the 12 notes. So you only have to press down C, then C sharp, then D sharp, up to B. So you go from C to B just one time, and that will just copy and paste that to every single octave. So that's an easy way if you're just doing a 12-note scale, custom scale, and you don't want to do all 127 notes. You just tune 12 notes, and it'll just copy and paste those values. So every C will be whatever you set it to. So C1 will be say you set it to -6 cents. C2 will now automatically be -6 cents. C3 will now automatically be -6 cents. It'll just copy and paste every octave. And again, you can press sequencer button up to 6 times to activate your 6 scales. Again, you do not need to save your scales. Any editing you do will automatically save. Sequencer button 12. You have a user 1 scale execute. If you turn the program value knob to the right, it'll say press the right button. This will erase your user scale. And you can do this for, if you keep pressing sequencer button 12, it'll go through user scales 1 through 6 and user octaves 1 through 6. So this is how you can erase your scales and octaves. If you press sequencer button 13, now you have the user scale dump, and it does the same thing. You hit it once to get in there, you're in scale 1. Hit it a second time, you're in scale 2. Up to scale 6, and then after scale 6, you hit it again, you're in octave 1. Up to octave 6, and this is if you want to dump the scales onto your computer or whatever. Then if you press the 15th sequencer button, because the 14th button is not illuminated, it doesn't do anything. This is an all dump, so it'll dump all your scales over USB. You turn the program value knob to the right once and it'll say right, and then you press right and it'll dump it. If you press the 15th button again, it will dump it over MIDI. The first default option, if you press the 15th sequencer button, when you enter it, it'll dump it over USB. If you hit it a second time, it'll dump it over MIDI. And those are your global options. So those are all of the options that you have in the menus. Now if you hit the exit button again, we get back to where we're going. So you have the right button on its own when you're not in any menus and you click the right button. It will ask you, where do you want to write this program? You set up the sound you want, and it will by default write it to the whatever slot program you're in, or you can press the program value over to the right or the left and choose a totally different program, anything from 1 to 500, and write it to wherever you want. And then you just press right again and it'll write it. Or you can hit exit and it'll cancel it. And then below that, below the 4 edit buttons, you have the 4 sequencer buttons. You have motion mode is the first one. The play mode is your second option that will play and stop the sequencer. To the right of play mode, you have record, which you can do step recording. And here you can choose how many steps you want it. By default, it's 16 steps. If you turn the program value knob to the left, it will shorten how many steps the sequence is down to 1 step, in increments of 1 step. And then to the right of that, you have your rest mode. So if you're in record mode, you're in step record, you can press a note and it will automatically have recorded it. Press another note, it moves on. Say you want to put a rest here, you click the rest button, it'll move on to the next step. Press another note, move on to the next step. And that's how you record your sequence. And you do that same thing with the motion controls. After you've recorded a sequence, now you can hold down a sequencer button, and press a note. If you don't want to record in step mode, you can do this sort of manual mode. And while you're holding down this button, you can also change your motion values, your parameters, to what you want them to be for that particular step. I think that covers it. So please let me know what you think about this. I've never done an accessibility video before. This is new to me, so any criticism is very much welcome. I would like to hear your criticism. Tell me what you think about this and whether or not it was helpful for you, and what I can do to improve accessibility videos in the future, and what other types of accessibility videos you'd like to see. I also play guitar and bass, and I use sound recording equipment. So if you would like an accessibility video for other synths, I have a Roland JDXA. I have an Erebus by Dreadbox. I have a Digitact by Electron, and an Arturia Keystep, and a Yamaha Mo DX. So if you would like, and a Roland MX1 mixer. So if you would like to see accessibility videos on those, let me know. So I do hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching.